Describe yourself in 3 words.
Integrity, loyalty, enthusiasm.
Very nice. Could you describe Trakke in 3 words?
Craft, pioneering, detailed.
I'm flattered. Thanks, Mark. That was great. Hi, I'm Alec and I am the founder of Trakke. Back in 2012, we launched a collaboration with one of the most famous names in Scottish textiles. It's a brand steeped in heritage, rooted in community and steadfastly made in the UK. Today, I'm chatting to the man who helped to bring that collaboration to fruition, Mark Hogarth, brand ambassador and former creative director of Harris Tweed Hebrides.
My name is Mark Hogarth. I am the brand ambassador, former creative director of Harris Tweed Hebrides. Small internal change just over the last 6 months, but I have been very enthusiastically involved in promoting Harris Tweed Hebrides specifically, whom I work for, the wider Harris Tweed industry, but also the wool. I sit on the campaign for wool, and I have an interest in craft and British, indeed Scottish manufacturing.
Hi, Mark.
Alec, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. As I've introduced, you obviously have worked for Harris Tweed Hebrides for a while now. Tell me a little bit more about what Harris Tweed is for people maybe who haven't heard of the brand.
Well, first and foremost, it is born of wool. So you have a woolen tweed. I think a lot of tweeds get immediately associated as people almost think, they are wool, but a tweed can really be anything. It's a woven fabric. Of course, the heritage and history of that industry is much storied in the UK, particularly in parts of Yorkshire, the Scottish borders. What makes Harris Tweed special is where it's from. There's a near symbiotic relationship between the land, the people, and the finished product. And that all, over a long period of time, came to finally be, put into statute with the Act of Parliament. Harris Tweed itself has to be from virgin wool, has to be made in the Outer Hebrides, Scotland, a little bit like champagne. Lots of lovely sparkling wines from California, from Northern Italy. Can't call them champagne, have to be from that geographically delineated area. In the same way with Harris Tweed, has to be there. But I think most importantly, it's not that geographical element, it's the fact that it has to be made at the home of the weaver. So that's one loom, one croft, one weaver. And that, I think, is what essentially has allowed Harris Tweed still to be in existence today.
So there's no factory as such. It's literally, across a whole island.
Yeah.
There are makers in their homes making Harris Tweed for this sort of global brand.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And of course, to survive globalization when everything was about yield and about product is real testament to the people of the Outer Hebrides who at various times had to fight for that. From entrepreneurs from Lord Leverborough, obviously, who left his name. He was the tinned fish entrepreneur involved in various other things. Of course, he looked at the Harris Tweed industry as it was growing in the early part of the 20th century. And his idea was, well, this is great, but we can produce more. We put 8 to 10 weavers in these little cooperatives, make it sound nice. But the essence of Harris Tweed would have been lost. And also, as stated before, the crofting element of the Hebrides is so important. It's really integral to the cultural aspect of keeping people on the land. If you think about the Highlands of Scotland and indeed the islands in the case of the Outer Hebrides, out-migration has been a problem for 300, 400 years. So by having Harris Tweed, particularly in the sense of how it fits into the other social, cultural, economic fabric of the islands, keeping that element of one weaver, one loom, one croft has been really, really important. And to play a part in that, albeit smaller than what the industry was, remains really important to this day.
I feel like crofting is something quite specific to Scotland and normally would be associated with maybe agriculture, small holdings, that sort of thing. Normally a house with a bit of land attached to it, and the idea is that you work the land to earn your keep.
Yeah.
But on Harris, you can be a weaver and that still qualifies as crofting.
Yes and no, but it's a very, very good question. And I think it's taken me a long time to understand that. You have to spend time in these communities, in these areas. essentially what you have in the Outer Hebrides, it's really quite fascinating as well, because it brings it into the modern parlance of when we talk about sustainability. So even when we talk about the sustainability of your bag or our jackets or our bags, whatever we're doing, we sustain a community in a very challenging socioeconomic part of Scotland, of the UK. So that has always been the case. And in terms of the actual crofting itself, you're absolutely right. There's that sustenance element where you've got a small tract of land. I mean, there's the Crofters Commission. There's it's managed really, really well. But you may have a big croft, could be 40 or 50 sheep, 10 or 12 cows. You've got your chickens. You're feeding them in. You sell a bit of the fleece that comes off the sheep when you shear it once a year. Some of that may go to the meat industry as well. But everything is tight. And this is where the weaving was essential, because people had portfolio existences. So you were a fisherman and a weaver. You were a crofter and a weaver.
It's like island life. You have to do a bit of everything.
One of our weavers, he is in the Reserve Fire Brigade. And I mean, that's not just like places where nothing happens. There's serious moorland fires in Outer Hebrides. You get 6 weeks or 2 months of dry weather. I think he's a fisherman. He's got his sheep. He breeds some sheep. He breeds cattle, and I think he does a few shifts in the community centre as well. And that is not atypical. And that's, I think, what makes it beautiful. But that when Harris Tweed was in the doldrums and looking like possibly getting into inexorable decline 20 years ago, 25 years ago, people couldn't understand. Forgive me for a quick anecdote. When we did a bit of work with New Balance, who've got a factory, they made in UK factories in Cumbria, and we're obviously having a discussion about the next collection. Said, look, but you need to deliver in time. The last time we did this, we got a phone call in August to say that it was going to be late, and we asked why, and they said, well, because the weather's really good, and we said, yeah, the weather's really good, and they said, no, we're going out Guga hunting. So the hunting of the Guga birds was happening that week, and also like, if there's a really good week's weather from April to October, the crofters are out in the fields. So the returns, the returns on the weaving will be less. Now, most weavers nowadays, the weaving will maybe be their primary source of income, but there's still a lot who, have got that dual lifestyle and will produce less. But of course, we're just better with, the digitization of a business. We're better at managing that. But that, for me, that is the beauty of it. It's mechanized, it's digitized, but it's not binary.
I mean, it's so unusual to have a very modern, globally known brand that operates in sort of such an unusual way. So, with really social responsibility baked in at its core. I mean, it is part of the community.
It is.
Its staff are working 6 to 8 different jobs and taking time off when the weather's good to go and do stuff where you need good weather. I mean, what a bizarre sort of blueprint for the modern world. It seems quite antiquated in lots of ways, but
it is.
Maybe that's where brands need to go.
I think it comes down to that element of craft, and for probably the first few years, people were talking about heritage, and I'm sure when you were doing the first few years of design, you were conscious of that, but you were making a very specific product. We had the heritage, and we had the craft. So it was about making a better product and moving forward, engaging with modernity. But because of the Act of Parliament, there's elements of the process that you can't change.
So tell me a bit about that, Mark, because I think, am I right in saying that Harris Tweed is one of the world's only fabrics that's protected by an Act of Parliament? Yeah. What's that all about?
So the Act of Parliament, if you think there's 100 years of protection that's gone into Harris Tweed, at some point, we don't quite fall from a European Union point of view. It wouldn't have been good enough just to get a geographical indicator or one of these certificates, because it's so specific. And I think that's what makes it Harris Tweed amazing, but it also gives difficulty as well, because anybody who was trying to bring that industry in would look at it and say, well, why do you have to have 150 weavers spread over an archipelago of islands that stretches 100 miles? You can see why, but I think the fundamental fact of keeping people on the land in different areas, allowing them to have those portfolio existences, has always led up to that element of of what the statute was meant to be. I mean, there's amazing cases of churchmen, reverends going over to plead at the US Senate because at some point, I think in the 50s, they were going to really raise the tariffs. And Harris Tweed to this day is still one of the only fabrics that's mentioned in US statute as an exception.
Really?
Because there was obviously ties, I think, with certain parts of the US, particularly in North Carolina, with the Hebridean diaspora. And just to have that exception. So we've always been exceptional, but you always have to continue to define what makes you exceptional rather.
So to be clear, the Act of Parliament really protects how the fabric is made and where it's made.
Exactly.
So it's protecting the provenance and the people
exactly
of the brand by sort of governmental degree.
Exactly. And it's something that, it's not something we need to pull out, but it's something that's there, and it stops, I think, the industry. It's self-serving in two senses. It's great from a consumer point of view because you've got it as a reference point, but it's also great from an industry point of view because, as you say, it's a decree, so therefore it can't be changed. It's not something at a board meeting or at the Harris Tweed Authority. They decide, the market's changed, consumer tastes have changed, we change, we can't change that. There's no amendment to it.
So, you're not going to be shipping Harris Tweed to be made overseas anytime soon.
Exactly. And that was one of the elements that came to be because obviously it has to be, spun, woven on the island. I think at some point people, there was a mill that was, I think, making or finishing the product in Inverness. And of course, as soon as you get that mission creep, in the same way that I would say when I first came into the industry, 2007, 2008, the nadir of the Harris Tweed industry, globalization had been around for 15, 20 years. Harris Tweed was seen to be old fashioned, even tweedy, was an adjective for being, a bit antiquated and just not cool. So we had to turn that on its head. And, we thankfully managed to do that. But I remember external voices suggesting that, we should blend it with cashmere to soften the handle. Now, the product might have been fine and a bit softer, but you've then lost 150, 170 years of heritage. It's gone. You're starting from zero.
Yeah. I mean, I remember back in 2012 asking the mill at Harris Tweed if we could weave in some reflective material into the tweed. Oh, I got told off. I'm not going to ask that question again. They wagged the Act of Parliament at me, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess with despite all of its history, wool really is one of the original technical fabrics, isn't it? It keeps you warm when it's cold. It keeps you cool when it's warm. But the brand is nearly 200 years old now. How is Harris Tweed remaining relevant today?
Wool in itself is quite remarkable, and I think there's a lot of technology now going into analysis. Like anything that is a farm product, there is of course negatives, but I think the former Prince, now King Charles, who is the patron of the Campaign for Wool, which I sit on, I wouldn't do the impression, but essentially said you could get as many boffins from around the world, put them in a lab for 2 years, and they still could not come up with something as unique and special for the garment and fashion industry as a sheep. Biodegradable, recyclable, reusable, hypoallergenic, and just those properties of wool, the natural lanolin that comes through, I think is quite remarkable. Obviously, there's other elements of animal husbandry, which I think are much better than what they were. Respect for the sheep has to go all the way through from the wool growing process. And I think it's much, much better, particularly here in the UK. And just getting that engagement, where people know the same way that they know where their food's coming from to appreciate what's on your plate. Where your fibres and your yarns and your garments are coming from as well. So if you take that as a raw natural resource, then you put the technical elements of how long, do you want these yarns to be, how many microns? So we set about 32 microns for Harris Tweed. A fine merino suit will be 18, maybe even 16, right down there with cashmere. So for me, it's fascinating, but also reassuring that, you're wearing natural fibres. And I think it definitely comes into the dynamic of really investing, but having that understanding of your relationship with your clothes and the environment.
I mean, you touched on it there, but in a world that sort of now, has global supply chains, why should we care where things are made?
I think it's really important to have that transparency, because then you can make informed decisions. And of course, if there is a complex supply chain, or indeed if there is a natural resource that is being farmed with integrity and is in the luxury sector or has longevity, then we want to make that from an informed opinion. I mean, I love the whole food analysis about how, it's great being vegan, it's great being vegetarian, we need to eat less, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want to buy asparagus in January because it's came from Peru. I may be wrong there, both geographically and seasonally.
Okay.
But if you take it as an example.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think this is something that we think about a lot, because obviously, we're manufacturing everything right here in Glasgow, and often using British-made materials as well, where they are available. Yeah. And sadly, there's a lot of things now that you can't buy in the UK. But I think it's always beautiful to see that there is a company in the UK. And I guess for me, a huge part of it is knowing that the money I'm spending on this fabric or this hardware or the product that I'm buying at the store is having a positive impact on a community near to me.
Yeah.
And there are lots of brands where you can give your money and make positive change with communities around the world. But I think there's something quite special about doing that at home.
No, there absolutely is. And also it's that element of the cost per wear projection, which I think is really important. So if you put those two together, Trakke obviously is within a mile of where my house is, and there's not a moment where I'll use my Trakke bag and just that means something, not consciously, but it actually does. And I think the same way with Harris Tweed. Part of our domestic success over the last 10 years, and we didn't really account for this, is gifting and tourism, where people just want to buy a product as close to where it's made as possible. And it's quite remarkable. And I find myself doing it as well. If I'm driving through France, and they are the masters of branding the land. So if you're in Chablis, you're in Chablis. If you're in Limousin, you know that's what their chief product is. If you're in Brie, you're in Brie. I think in Scotland we're getting a little bit better at that. So obviously in the Hebrides, Harris Tweed's fundamental. If you're in the borders,
with whiskey as well, you're doing a similar thing, branding areas of Scotland with flavour and things as well.
And I'd like to say it tastes better, in terms of the whiskey or some of the food products. But I think there's something in the human psyche that we like to be as close to the narrative of the product as possible.
I mean, you're obviously very passionate about what you do. What would you say you love most about your job?
I think that there's many aspects to it. I love the variety of people that I'm privileged to meet because we're an international company. We're dealing with a variety of markets. My original study was in geopolitics, and I'd always dreamed of traveling the world, which I did with a backpack on. But then to have a second life of doing that with a laptop and with some swatches of Harris Tweed has been a real privilege. So I think the travel and meeting the variety of people, and then again on the domestic front is just spending time in the Outer Hebrides, speaking to weavers, speaking to our designers, being in the mill, which is a veritable Charlie and the Chocolate Factory experience. Just seeing the carding machines go, listening to them. It's a much nicer environment than a dairy farm that I grew up with, which was a bit of a smelly slog, to be honest. There was jobs there that I'm still traumatized by, and I'm not saying that all the jobs in the Harris Tweed mill or indeed at the weavers, for example, the weaver has to tie in the loom, which is over 1,400 threads. It's very patient, time consuming, but there is a nice variety of activity there, and there's a really, really nice calm sense in that workplace.
It seems like maybe since being a kid, you've sort of got a connection with the land in one sense or another. From being on a farm to the work you do now, it's all sort of quite rooted in place and people doing things with their hands and things growing.
It's an interesting one because I was quite academic and obviously went to university, but I think as you get older, you appreciate the natural environment more, and you strive for that. But I think definitely if you're looking at a computer screen all day, which, building Harris Tweed, traveling, just spending these weeks then in front of a computer screen as we were growing, I think you miss just those arbitrary tasks. And I remember one summer, doing a lot of work, a lot of travel, and thinking back what was my favourite days. And it wasn't being on a beach in a Mediterranean resort. It was actually just the simple element of painting a fence with my nephew and showing him how to paint. And I think we've all got that in us. I mean, you're very lucky, obviously, to craft bags and have an amazing team. And at Harris Tweed, I think we are the same as well. So I think there's definitely a balance.
I mean, I think one of the nice things about Harris Tweed, and obviously the fact that it's made from wool, is that despite the fact that it's nearly 200 years old, a lot of the themes that it touches on are really showing a huge resurgence at the moment. I mean, particularly with sustainability. Yeah. All eyes are on, where something's made, how it's made, how the people who work there are treated. And obviously you guys have a long-standing history with that. What advice would you give to someone who wanted to reduce their environmental impact?
I believe that you have to have an integrity first and foremost, which is about what impact is your product having. And it may be having a particularly positive impact on its design, but ultimately what is the value of that product vis-a-vis what is the cost? And the cost is not actually what the consumer's paying for it, the cost is to the environment. And I think we have got human tendencies that we're not completely honest with ourselves on that front. I think for Harris Tweed, because we're operating just with these 160, 170 weavers, it becomes like almost this inverted pyramid. So you turn the pyramid down, you get 140 weavers here, they end up making cloth, but in relatively small volumes. So it's that scarcity element that allows it to remain special, and it's working in sync with the natural environment in the Outer Hebrides as well. And small details like the loom has no power. Obviously, it's treadle loomed.
What does that mean?
So it means you actually have to power it with your feet,
like a
bicycle.
Like bicycle pedal?
Absolutely, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, classic treadle loom. That was always the case, slightly more different, but yeah, there's a chain, and you've got this huge, clunky, double width loom. Bonus Griffiths, made in South Shields, just in the north east of England. But once you have that there, you're tying things in, you're setting it up, and you're powering that by your human power.
So is this why you're so into cycling, Mark? Is this so that you can be the backup weaver if you're short-staffed?
I think I've probably got skills in the bike, but it takes a fair bit of skill to operate a loom.
And the coordination.
And the coordination, there's a cadence to it. It's not just all about power. You've got to get the right cadence, most importantly, but also the patience when, a bit of the wet thread or the warp thread snaps, stop, got to reset it, and you've got to carry the same patience through that whole process again. I mean, weaving is amazing because it is so time consuming, but I think the good weavers, it's just it's that classic case of man, woman, and machine becoming one. And I don't know if I've got that patience.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all that work, and you've got nothing to show for it on Strava,
Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem.
Yeah, you've not gone anywhere.
Exactly, right? But you have. I guess you weave like 100 meters of fabric or something.
Yeah. I mean, over a long period of time. Yeah, you're right. I think there are similarities in terms of being on the loom. I'm sure your mind can drift away somewhere really positive. Being on the bike, it can do as well. But I don't know. I like a little aggressive hill, both up and down occasionally, just to break momentum and add a little bit of variety.
So I know, outside of Harris Tweed, you've actually worked in sort of the fashion industry in one form or another for quite a long time. And, you're a fashionable guy. How, I guess, unfortunately, fashion is too often about newness and about trends and seasons. How do you stay fashionable without over-consuming?
I mean, it's a great point, and it's something that has been around for a long time, and you're always engaged with that element. I mean, fashion is, of course, as you rightly say, is about the new, and we were always quite conscious at Harris Tweed about being in the fashion industry but not necessarily in fashion, because by being in fashion, at some point, by definition, you will be out of fashion. So we wanted to be stylish We want to be ever present. And Harris Tweed, we are we're making the same product. However, we're making it in different weights. We're making it in a massive variety of different patterns. And actually, when I lived in Japan and was beginning to work with Harris Tweed and the concept of it, learned so much from the Japanese, but also learned a lot from the Scotch whisky industry as well, which of course was very popular in Japan. And their storytelling was incredible, their branding was incredible, but they were making the same product, So and those distilled or indeed made with craft, with a very specific heritage. But it was the way they could imbue that into this unique product, which translated incredibly well to the consumer. And
I think we've talked about this before, actually, Mark, and I completely agree with you that it's very inspiring to see how Scottish whisky has become this enormous export. And I always think it's interesting. I know that this is true for Harris Tweed, and it's true for us as well, that we do a lot of work with Scottish drinks companies. And I think it's for that exact reason, isn't it? Is that we're all making something that's all about the people and the provenance and the place and the country that it's made from. And, thankfully, Scotland is a very beautiful and romantic country, and people around the world. I mean, unfortunately, I'm English, but if I could be Scottish, I would happily trade my passport.
You served your 10 years. Does that not make you?
No one likes the English. It's all about Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's such an incredible point that you make just about what you're doing in terms of the people, the place, the product, but also that projection as well. Going back to the fashion and the style dynamic, we don't really talk about marketing as such. We believe that if we continue to make the product in the way that we've always made it, but we are a bit smart and a bit nuanced, and we're always looking to work with people as well. We don't actually sell the finished product. We're only as good as those companies, those brands that we partner with, and that's really, really important. So when it comes to that level, it is a classic case of the finished product. The sum of the total should be greater than individual parts. And what we like to do is to balance, or indeed to juxtapose, our story with somebody else's story, because you're bringing out the best in both.
I mean, it's all about good partnerships, isn't it? And I think, certainly for us, when we did that collaboration back in 2012, I think it was a turning point for us as a brand. I mean, I think up to that point, I don't think we were really selling overseas. Mm-hmm. I think there was a relatively small audience of people who knew about Trakke. And I feel like we did this Harris Tweed collab, and suddenly we're getting orders from Japan, from the States. And it really was an eye-opener for me, the power of that brand.
Yeah. I think the detailed element of the Harris Tweed process, but then that also puts the spotlight, to speak, on your process as well.
It does,
and I think, when we were coming in and, looking how we could redevelop Harris Tweed, the one thing I saw was detail, and the one thing to mention the Japanese market. Obviously I stood there on fitting floors with the designers from Easy Miyake, Comme des Garçons, and I had a translator, and I was really lucky, and I just spent all day asking why is this important? Why is this button stitched, in this way? Why is there a small belt loop there? I mean, in terms of ergonomic design, in terms of detail, just way ahead. And if they can pick that detail out in your product, you're going to win. And I think also that Oriental take on craft and design really started to move over and to permeate into Western design philosophy as well.
I mean, I think certainly the Japanese market is known for being very detail focused, and that sort of goes all the way to the consumer, who are very selective about the quality of the things that they buy. But I think that's an interesting one. I mean, we work in the industry and you spend a lot of time looking at things that are really high quality. We're very lucky for that. But I often wonder, as a consumer, how can you tell if something is high quality or not? Do you have any, are there some cues that you would say you could look for and say that is well made or not?
For me, I tend to get a product, turn it inside out. It's almost like how clean is your house? Well, your house is as clean as you see it, but it's not until you open the cupboards, go in, you
lift up the carpets.
Yeah, lift up the carpets. Exactly. Behind the couch, I think you go where the eyes don't take you. And, by turning something inside out, by by seeing that those detailed elements of the CMT, cut, measure, and trim, you get a better. But then also just by playing around with something, I love that whole element of engaging with a product, and by wearing something, by taking a bag out for a trial, you've got to see how it reacts to those moments where you didn't expect to be in a certain situation. And I think that's where you find out how well conceived something's been, but then also how well made it's been as well. Now that is a test, the test of time as that will maybe come. And yeah, it's complicated, but I think you can still, from that initial engagement, if you develop these little hacks, you do get behind the manufacturing process.
I think there is something to be said where sometimes you just, take hold of something and you can just feel the quality. But then, as you say, there's a difference between something being well made and a sort of quality of thought in that it's well designed and it's been considered for this purpose or whatever. Do you think that slow fashion has to be expensive? Are they sort of mutually exclusive? Or?
I don't think they are mutually exclusive, but I think you have to prepare the consumer to pay more. And one of my big mantras are we need to educate on overconsumption, and at some point we probably have to legislate on overproduction. You can't have the two. For me, the analogy is you've got this game of musical chairs, and as long as there's cheap products just flooding the market, we're doing well by being sustainable. We're doing well by making products here at Trakke, at Harris Tweed, that are going to have a long and durable life cycle. But ultimately, it's a little bit of a losing battle, because the consumer, and we are, including myself, including my peer groups,
absolutely,
we are being allowed to think that you can have a certain level of quality at a certain price. And it goes back to that whole cost element. What is the true cost? True cost to supply chain, to wages, not reaching the appropriate level, both domestically and indeed in the third world, and also cost to the environment as well. What components are we using? So I think there has to be an integrity to it, and also we just have to get back into the habit of making our consumption an investment and not an expense.
I mean, I do feel like that maybe for the last 10 years that a lot of the narrative around sustainability has been quite directed at consumers and been saying, oh, you need to stop using plastic straws and you need to stop doing, do your recycling better, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. And like, there are absolutely ways that we can, on an individual level, make change. But fundamentally, I think it's a drop in the ocean compared to what companies can do.
Yeah.
And I mean, to get a little bit technical, I guess, with some insider stuff, I mean, at the minute they're talking about extended producer responsibility, like ERP. And I know that you've been talking about this recently. Do you want to explain to me a little bit about what extended producer responsibility is?
Extended producer responsibility is coming out of the European Union, but of course we'll change over to worldwide statutes at some point as well. And if you start from the end of the product, the life cycle analysis, you've got these closed dumps in the Atacama Desert in South America and in Ghana as well. And they've been traced back to producers who have made clothes in the fast fashion dynamic that have ended up in landfill. You will then be, under the new legislation, you will be fined or you'll be made responsible for the clothes that end up in landfill. And I think that is essential, because it should get to where we should be going, which is to produce less.
Or to find ways to make the product that you have made last longer. Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the ways that ERP is going to come in, is with things like repairs, buyback schemes, etc., like caring about what happens at the end of a product's life, which to be fair, understandably, I can see why people don't think about it, because often it seems so far in the future. And I think it's always tempting to be a little bit optimistic about how long something really will last. Yeah. But for us, for example, I mean, we make a bag made of canvas, made sometimes of tweed, of wool, various different materials. And, however durable they are, they have a shelf life. They will only last for a certain amount of time, and life gets in the way and sometimes makes that shelf life shorter and shorter. Yeah. So the key isn't so much, I mean, you want to focus about making it last as long as you can, but crucially, you want to make sure that when it does die, you can bring it back to life and revive it, which is one of the beautiful things about wax canvas as well as Harris Tweed. the ability to repair and reproof.
I think you touch on a really important point there. And it's not just about the product for me, it's about the person. So I spoke a little bit before about extended personal responsibility, what we have with that engagement. But if you look at what Harris Tweed does, we'll take an order. Our lead times will stretch from between 12 weeks to 18, 19 weeks. You have to wait for that. It's one of the original forms of slow fashion. You've done that as well. You get a just-in-time, roughly speaking, manufacturing process where, you're not just carrying lots of stock. You're making the bags.
Yeah, we're quite lean. We do hold stock, but certainly very limited amounts because we just monitor the shelf and we make more as we need it.
Yeah. And for me, that is an inconvenience to some, but a beauty to others. I think once you get into that process, I sound really old here, but I remember, when you were growing up and you wanted that thing, but your parents would say, no, you can't have that thing. You need to save up for it, or you've got a new pair of trainers 2 months. And it meant that when you finally got round to earning enough pocket money or, coming round to your birthday, whatever, you appreciated that garment or that product or that pair of trainers much more. And I think the downfall or the downside of fast fashion, yes, you've got these incredible designs that have been taken or inspired or copied from high fashion, from haute couture, from the Parisian maisons or the Italian menswear houses, and you've got a replica of it, but it became too easy. It just became too cheap. So I think in the same way that you have to put regulations and quotas on food, I think we have to do that in fashion. It's finally coming around now, but that sounds very negative, and I don't think it is, because I think it comes down to that element of we have to teach ourselves to be better consumers. And I love the fact that I've now got space in my wardrobe. It actually makes you more creative for what you have, but also when it comes to getting ready to buy something new, that's an investment and not an expense.
So what's for example the most worn thing in your wardrobe at the moment, or the oldest thing? Whichever way you want to play.
A variety of things. Obviously I've got Harris Tweed jackets that go back, that I bought from the vintage scape, but I really like the ones that I had from new, because they're my product, they're my story. I've had them for 15 or 16 years now, since the inception of Harris Tweed Hebrides. So they're there. I think beyond that, just to have like a classic Shetland jumper, or I actually had I got gifted from the Barry Mill, a beautiful bit of cashmere, sorry, not wool. There we go, my time campaign for wool now ends. But there's obviously a beautiful bit of cashmere, but it was one of those go-to items when we were all working from home. Testament to the fact I was working, elbows completely worn out. But there is an amazing company in Scottish Borders called Visible Creative Mending. And Flora, she fixes the top to the design that you like. And it's not cheap, but this is where it's really important. By her putting her craft and skills into repairing that item the same way you do here at Trakke, it's got a whole different chapter.
It becomes unique in its own right. No one else has that exact jacket with that exact repair.
Exactly.
It has a story, doesn't it?
It's literally added value.
Yeah.
And it's given it another chapter or two, and you then engage with it even more. You're a bit more careful about when and where you wear it. But I think there's a future in that. And also, this is what I've discovered, not from a textbook or from a journal. This is through my own lived experience. I now say with pride, this has been visibly creatively mended, as opposed to maybe 10, 20 years ago, you'd be like, oh, this is new, I got it in Selfridges.
Yeah.
And the dopamine you're getting from that, I think is universal. The same way that I've got a 25-year-old car, which will be with me till death. And I now can't part with it because it's been to Poland with me, it's been to Florence for Pitti Uomo. It's had the roof stuck down on a wet day in Denniston with people laughing at me. There's a whole sequence of stories of me and that product, in that case a car, but also in the case of having that beautiful cashmere hoodie, which I couldn't afford to replace, B, I didn't want to replace, but is now I've actually got something even better than the original.
Yeah. So speaking of repairs, you've actually brought your bag in today, haven't you, for repair? This, I think, is... I think we actually did something a bit special for you, didn't we, Mark? And you bought a specific tweed for us that we turned into this specific bag. It's a Bairn Messenger, probably back from 2012 when we very first started working together. I mean, you must have some stories with this bag.
Yeah, I've definitely almost lost it a few times as well.
Oh, really?
Yep. The last one, maybe 2 years ago, I left it in a bar in Denniston, and I've never been so thankful that the next day both bag and laptop were in play. But planes, trains, automobiles, bicycles with salmon in the back of it, it has been just an incredible asset. And just that whole thing when you're going on a business trip, I'm a ninja packer. I think only ever if I'm taking samples will I do any checked in luggage. I haven't had a bad back and having operations to that, I'm always well balanced. And it's the weekend bag in one hand, it's a laptop bag in the other. And it gives you that element of assuredness. Passport in here, a couple of widgets, pens and papers in here. There you go. Boomer style. I still use the written word, and the laptop sitting in there perfectly as well.
I mean, it's looking in pretty good condition. I think just looking on the outside, I mean, certainly, I think obviously the wax canvas has developed this beautiful age. The tweed is also aging well, and actually you can see on the inside here of this pleat, this is the original color of the tweed there. So you can see that, over the years, the sun and the weather has, muted the tone a little bit. I quite like that.
Yeah, I do. Would you call that a patina? Is that a patina only for leather?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think particularly with this type of canvas, which would have been, a wet wax finish, it does this really beautiful thing where it goes shiny and from a distance. Yeah, I think it does leather, doesn't it? No, really,
absolutely. I mean, we're often at similar trade shows to Harley Stevenson's. And good friends, we've always got a couple of things in the pipeline with these guys as well. So, there's no better advert, I think, for Scottish Textiles. It's when I walk onto their stand or they come on our stand and, that bag's there and just, the wares. I calculated actually over the 12 years of me having that, probably using it 4 or 5 times a week, maybe more if I'm using it the weekends. I think if you did a Martindale test on that, it would be probably between 80 and 100,000 rubs.
Really?
Yeah. Because of the fact that you're going out, 60% of the time. So if you calculate that over 12 years and the amount of rubs you're accumulating from on and off trains, buses, doing 5 or 6 appointments, often if I'm in London or in continental Europe, seeing customers. So it's been remarkable. Naturally, it'll be obviously in a lot more sun, hitting a lot more sun. It's what a jacket or coat would be. Yeah. So there's a little bit of movement there. But yeah, I think testament to the original manufacturer here at Trakke, and also to the Harris Tweed. The weave there as well. It's as robust as it ever was.
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, just looking at it, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but there's a little bit of damage on the binding here, which is easy because we can just unpick that and replace that very, very easily. And on the back here, you can see where all of those wears have over time caused abrasion with the tweed. Yeah. Now, I must admit, this is a very early example. We've updated this bag design precisely because that we used to get sort of wear issues in these areas.
So you now have a different or a thicker base to that?
Yeah, so we have a thicker base. We changed the way the curve works. So we ran a seam here instead of having this curve around at the base, which provides a bit more structure in this area too. We also now would bond the wool onto like a fabric, like a wax canvas. So nowadays we'll take the wool, bond it to the canvas directly, which stops it from shifting like this. Yeah. And when you stop it from shifting like this, you don't get as much abrasion, which is really what's being seen here. So I think, we've made improvements over time. And really, I guess that's the beauty of a repair scheme from our perspective, is that when we repair things, we learn where we've made mistakes and we learn how we can make our designs better. So I think, this kind of thing coming back to us, it is great education for us. And obviously it feels even better to know that we can restore that to a condition that you're going to be proud to wear it again.
Yeah. No, exactly that. And just, I think we touched on that element with talking about Japan. like the ergonomics of this, but see, just having the ability even to hold that with one hand, being a busy urban environment, where you're conscious of your space, and even you're looking for receipts or you're looking for a card, and just it's the flip. For me, that there, again, safety elements there or easy access there. So I think you definitely you got a lot right with the design on this as well. And for me, just I wear a lot of blue as well, so it's like color wise, you're never conscious that it's not working with your outfit. That could be anywhere from a suit all the way down to just something very, very casual. So no,
I mean, it that sort of touches on something that they say about sort of capsule wardrobes, isn't it? Is make sure that everything in your wardrobe matches everything else, because then you've got, from 10 items of clothing, you've got sort of infinite combinations.
Yep.
And I think people sometimes forget with bags, because what we find is that a lot of our customers buy a bag and they just use that one bag for everything. And so they use the bag day in, day out. And as a result, obviously it's going to wear faster than a jacket because you might have 10 jackets in rotation, or trainers, and similarly. But having, a bag in a color that you can wear every day, that goes with every outfit, I think is, vital, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the great thing about doing that 12-year reflection, if I look at, for example, we spoke earlier, my favourite Harris Tweed jacket is now on its third lining. A lot of our customers now are doing quarter linings, are just lining the sleeves for those reasons, because I think that's about movement, and Harris Tweed is a fabric, just it moves very well. So why constrain it with a lining? So what was in traditional design for garments or traditional design for bags, I think you've always got to look at it, and it's sometimes best looked at when you've got the advantage of having a heavily worn product as well. So
you've worn this on the bike as well as in your day-to-day life and things like that. You're a keen cyclist. Yeah. What is it about cycling? Why are you so passionate about cycling?
It's such a great question, because I've cycled a lot. So when I lived in Japan, just old school Japanese shopping bike. The bag would go into the front basket, and I was quite sporty. I had a terrible leg break playing rugby when I was 22. Played a bit of five-a-sides after that. Had 6 operations finally over 10 years to get that fixed. And you almost a little bit forgot the fact that you could do competitive sports, and the fact that I really loved doing competitive sports, playing both rugby and football. 2020, obviously, we were all looking for things to do. I definitely wanted to try to find ways of keeping the exercise up, curtailing the alcohol, and the 6 of us went out one day with a bit of experience to kind of had cycled before, and people like myself who had only ever done it in an urban environment. So at that point, I had my little Tokyo bike, which I would have used the bag for a little bit there, but we went over Eaglesham Moor, beautiful sunny, mid spring day, and you just think, wow, there's something in this. Because cycling gives you an abundance of things. You get great headspace. You can be as competitive as you want to be, and then you see this incredible country that we have. I lived away for about 10 to 12 years, and I'd engaged in Scottish countryside from the point of view of doing car journeys. I'm not a great climber because obviously I haven't had the badly broken leg. But I just love being in nature. I love that kind of 3D element. So on the bicycle, I mean, it's amazing. In a day cycling, if you're doing 50 or 60 miles, I can get up to Aberfoyle, I can do the Duke's Pass, I can get into the Trossachs.
Yeah.
I can go down and see my parents in Ayrshire and back up. And you just wouldn't have thought that was possible. So just to get that engagement is great. But then equally, just being in Glasgow, and if I get a meeting in the city centre, if I've got to come down to see yourselves here, or I've got to go 4 or 5 miles, the fastest way for me to get there is on a bike. And
it's transport and sport.
Transport, sport, and it's been transformational. It's been a really good thing.
Obviously, you're dressed with a lot of Harris Tweed today, but on a bike, would you describe yourself as a mamil? Is that a rude thing to say to you?
No, I am a mamiwa.
A mamiwa?
Yes.
Tell me more.
Is a middle-aged man or middle-class man, or what is it?
Well, a mamil is middle-aged man in lycra.
Yeah, so I'm a middle-aged man in wool. So I need to work in that acronym a little bit.
A little bit, Mark, yeah.
So there's amazing products with sport wool. So highly tech, but about 30 or 40% wool product, obviously mixed in with lycra or a tech fabric, but just to have that little bit of wool through the both the shorts and the top. There's an Italian company I've used, but there's also some good UK-based manufacturing here with different brands that I think are moving towards that as well.
And actually, maybe I tried to think six years ago or so now, you actually used to organise a Harris Tweed ride, didn't you, around Glasgow? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that we will do it again. It just it becomes quite hard to organise. But I know we brought a group down here to Trakke before. Yeah, just an urban ride. All very debonair, a bit of sartorialism. Some nice stops at fine Glasgow establishments, coffees in the morning, oysters, and maybe a glass of beer or champagne as well. But essentially like 6 or 7 stops in and around Glasgow, usually going east to west or vice versa, with a variety of different bikes of different ages and stages. I think even we had a gentleman, Sven, on a penny farthing one year.
Yeah, I mean, I dread to think what the public thought was cycling past, because you've got this horde of people who look like they just fell out of the 1920s, head to toe in tweed, riding penny farthings. I mean, it was quite an experience, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, it takes a bit of management. I think the biggest impediment doing it is the fact for safety, because you're conscious of the fact you are still on the road. But we will do it again, and it's a great way to see. I think even one year or for several years, a lady came and she wore her original, I think, Strathclyde Regional Council NHS coat.
Really?
Yeah. So in beautiful blue Harris Tweed, not dissimilar to the blue on here.
Wow.
So, I mean, that is, you're getting this incredible little bit of heritage there.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of in many ways quite a silly event.
Yeah.
But it was so fun. It had such a great sense of community, and then you pull out all of these little stories from the event, and it was quite a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, it was.
I'd love to see it happen.
Yeah,
again.
no, I think we definitely will do it again, because people really make the effort, and it's that whole community element, like-minded people. I know a wee bit more about bikes now than I probably did then as well, which maybe it would help.
Well, Mark, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I think hearing more about Harris Tweed, and it is such a unique material. I think sometimes I think you forget about it. It's one of those names that's been around for years and years and years. And to a layman like me, learning more about just how it's made, where it's made, and how it's completely relevant to the modern world that we live in now, it's been a joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. It's been great.